In the heart of rural Texas, there was a small, forgotten town called Willow Creek. It was the kind of place that wasn't on any map, where the population never seemed to change. The folks who lived there were generations deep, their roots buried in the dry soil, and their secrets buried even deeper. Willow Creek had its share of old legends, whispered tales told over flickering campfires or in hushed tones at the local diner. But there was one story that everyone in town knew, yet no one dared speak of it out loud: the story of the Devil's Eye. On the outskirts of town, just beyond the tree line of a dense forest, there stood an ancient farmhouse, weathered by time, its walls crumbling, its windows long shattered. The house had been abandoned for as long as anyone could remember, yet it never truly stood empty. The house had a reputation, an ominous one. The elders spoke of the strange occurrences that had taken place there over the decades. Unexplainable sounds in the dead of night, strange lights flickering in the windows, and shadows that moved when no one was inside. But the most disturbing aspect of the house was the portrait that hung above the grand fireplace in the main hall. The painting depicted a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face obscured in shadow. His eyes, however, were a striking, unnerving shade of red, almost glowing as if lit from within. They seemed to follow anyone who dared enter the room, no matter where they stood. The townsfolk called it the Devil's Eye. Generations had passed, and the house had become a rite of passage for the local kids. They would dare one another to spend a night inside, or even just to go and touch the portrait. Most refused, but there was always someone who couldn't resist proving their bravery. The stories were always the same. Those who stayed in the house would hear strange noises, whispers in the dark, footsteps echoing in empty halls, and that eerie feeling of being watched. They'd see things too: fleeting shadows, cold gusts of wind in rooms with no open windows, and, of course, the eyes in the portrait that seemed to burn brighter the longer you looked. But it wasn't until the disappearance of Tommy Baker that the legend took on a more sinister turn. Tommy was 16, reckless and full of bravado. He'd been dared by his friends to spend a full night in the old house. It was a rite of passage, they said, a way to prove that the stories were just that, stories. Tommy accepted the challenge without hesitation, a smirk on his face, confident that he'd return the next morning with the tale of how he'd bested the Devil's Eye. The night was dark, with the moon hidden behind thick clouds, casting Willow Creek into an oppressive blackness. Tommy's friends gathered near the edge of the forest, watching as he entered the house with nothing but a flashlight and a sleeping bag. Hours passed, and the group waited, expecting to hear Tommy's laugh or see his flashlight beam signaling his victory. But as the night dragged on, there was only silence. The wind began to howl and the temperature dropped, an unusual cold settling over the town. By dawn, there was still no sign of Tommy. His friends finally worked up the courage to enter the house. They found his flashlight on the floor, still on, its weak beam casting long shadows across the room. His sleeping bag was unrolled, but empty. Tommy was gone, vanished without a trace. The only thing out of place was the portrait. The eyes in the painting, which had always been red, now glowed with an intensity that sent a shiver down their spines. It was as if the Devil's Eye had come alive, watching them, judging them. The disappearance of Tommy Baker sent shockwaves through Willow Creek. The sheriff organized a search party, but there was no sign of the boy. The townsfolk began to murmur, old fears resurfacing. They warned their children to stay away from the house, to leave the past buried. But the legend had taken root, and the story of the devil's eye grew darker, more twisted. The search for Tommy lasted weeks, with volunteers combing through the dense forests and nearby creeks. Even the most skeptical members of the community found themselves wondering if there was truth to the old tales. Some suggested that Tommy had simply run away, but those who knew him best rejected the idea. Tommy was adventurous, yes, but he wasn't the type to abandon his family and friends without a word. As time passed, the whispers in the town grew louder. People began to speak of the other strange happenings that had occurred over the years. Pets that had gone missing, unexplained cold spots in the air, and the way the lights in the house seemed to flicker in patterns that resembled Morse code. But nothing was ever proven, and nothing ever came close to explaining the strange events surrounding the Devil's Eye. Years passed, and the old house remained untouched, a monument to the unknown. But the story didn't end with Tommy Baker. One summer, a new family moved to Willow Creek. The Andersons were city folk looking for a quieter life. They bought a small farm on the other side of town and quickly integrated into the community. They'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone did. But they didn't put much stock in local legends. To them, the old farmhouse was just that, an old empty house. The Andersons had a daughter, Lily, a curious and imaginative 12-year-old. She was the kind of girl who found magic in everyday things, be it a bird's nest tucked into the crook of a tree or the pattern of raindrops on a bedroom window. She'd heard the tales of the Devil's Eye from the other kids at school and was fascinated by the idea of a haunted house. She asked her parents about it, but they dismissed the stories as nonsense. Lily's curiosity, however, was not so easily quelled. She began asking more questions, listening carefully to the hushed conversations among the townsfolk. The more she heard, the more intrigued she became. The house, to her, seemed less like a place to be feared and more like a puzzle to be solved. The stories of Tommy Baker only fueled her determination to explore it for herself. One day, while exploring the woods, Lily found herself near the old farmhouse. The structure loomed in the distance, half hidden by overgrown trees and ivy. She felt a strange pull, an almost magnetic urge to go closer. Ignoring the warnings of her classmates, she approached the house, her heart pounding in her chest. The door creaked open with a push, and Lily stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. She wandered through the empty rooms, her footsteps echoing off the walls. She noticed the furniture, long covered in white sheets, like ghosts frozen in time. Each room she entered was eerily still, as if the house had been waiting for her arrival. And then she saw the portrait hanging above the fireplace. The eyes were the first thing she noticed. They seemed to glow, even in the dim light filtering through the broken windows. She felt as though they were watching her, following her every move. Lily took a step closer, then another. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the frame. The air around her seemed to grow colder, and she heard a faint whisper, too soft to make out the words. But the voice was unmistakable. It wasn't friendly. Fear gripped her, and she turned to leave, but her feet wouldn't move. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, echoing in her mind. She looked back at the portrait, and the eyes seemed to burn into her soul, filling her with a sense of dread she'd never known before. Suddenly, The room went black. The air was filled with the sound of footsteps coming closer and a deep, guttural growl that seemed to come from all around her. Lily screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The room was silent. The lights flickered back to life, and Lily found herself standing in the middle of the room, her heart racing. The portrait was still there, the eyes still glowing, but the whispers had stopped. She ran out of the house, not stopping until she was back home. Her parents found her hours later, curled up in her bed, shaking. She couldn't explain what had happened, couldn't find the words to describe the terror she'd felt. After that day, Lily was never the same. She became withdrawn, jumpy, always looking over her shoulder as if expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. Her once vivid imagination turned dark, plagued by nightmares of the house and the portrait with its burning red eyes. Her parents were worried, but no amount of comforting could erase the fear in her eyes. The townsfolk noticed the change too. They knew the signs, had seen it before. The whispers began again, and the legend of the devil's eye grew stronger. As the weeks passed, Lily's condition worsened. She spoke less and less, spending most of her time staring out the window as if waiting for something. She began to hear the whispers again, even in the safety of her own home. They were always faint, just on the edge of her hearing, but they were there, calling her back to the house. A month after Lily's visit to the house, the Astersons decided to leave Willow Creek. They packed up their belongings and left in the middle of the night, not bothering to say goodbye. It wasn't a sudden decision. Rather, it was the culmination of weeks of sleepless nights and a growing sense of unease that something terrible was just around the corner. Lily's parents were at their wits' end. They had tried everything, doctors, counselors, even the local preacher, but nothing could shake the dark cloud that had settled over their daughter. She had become a shadow of her former self, her once vibrant personality, now dull and lifeless. She spoke only when spoken to, and even then her answers were short, whispered as though she was afraid to speak too loudly. The final straw came one night when Mrs. Anderson awoke to find Lily standing at the foot of her bed, her eyes wide open but unseeing. She was sleepwalking, her lips moving silently, as if she was talking to someone unseen. Her mother's heart pounded in her chest as she gently led Lily back to her room. It was then that she noticed something chilling. Lily's eyes, normally a soft hazel, seemed to have taken on a strange reddish tint. That was the moment the Andersons knew they had to leave. They couldn't explain it, didn't want to even try. All they knew was that something was terribly wrong with their daughter, and the only solution was to get her as far away from Willow Creek as possible. The townsfolk understood. No one blamed the Andersons for leaving. They'd seen it before, how the darkness of the old house could seep into a person's soul, how it could change them. They had hoped that maybe this time things would be different, but the house was relentless, its curse unbroken. As the Andersons' car disappeared down the dusty road, the people of Willow Creek sighed in quiet resignation. The town returned to its quiet routine, but the memory of Lily and Tommy lingered like a spectre, always present, always watching. The house remained silent and foreboding on the edge of the forest, a dark stain on the otherwise peaceful town. No one dared go near it, not anymore. The children stopped their games of daring one another to enter. Even the bravest among them felt the weight of the stories that had been passed down, the tales of those who had ventured inside. and never returned the same. But the legend of the Devil's Eye didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year as new generations of Willow Creek's children whisper the story to one another in secret, each version more terrifying than the last. They spoke of how the eyes in the portrait were not just painted on canvas, but were the eyes of the devil himself, trapped in the painting and waiting for his next victim. They said that anyone who looked too long into those eyes would find the soul trapped, drawn into the portrait, never to escape. Others claim that the man in the portrait was once the master of the house, a wicked sorcerer who had made a deal with the devil. In exchange for eternal life, he had sacrificed his own humanity, his soul forever bound to the painting. And now he roamed the house at night, searching for others to take his place so that he might finally be free. The whispers continue, passed down from generation to generation, a reminder that some places are better left alone and some stories are better left untold. But the house stood, patient, waiting for the day when another curious soul would wander too close, drawn by the lure of the unknown. And so the Devil's Eye remained, watching, waiting, its fiery gaze never dimming, its hunger never satisfied. One day, many years later, the townsfolk awoke to find the old house engulfed in flames. The fire was fierce and sudden, and by the time anyone could reach the scene, it was too late. The house burned to the ground, its walls collapsing inward, the flames reaching high into the sky as if trying to consume the very heavens. When the fire finally died down, nothing was left but smoldering ashes. The portrait, the Devil's Eye, was gone, consumed by the flames. But as the townspeople sifted through the ruins, they found something that chilled them to the bones. Among the ashes, they discovered a single unburnt item, a small piece of canvas, charred around the edges but still intact. It was the eye, the Devil's Eye, red and glowing as if lit from within. It was the only part of the painting that had survived the inferno. And as the people of the Willow Creek stared at it, they felt the weight of the curse settle over them once more. No one knows what happened to the eye. Some say it was buried deep in the woods far from town, where it could never hurt anyone again. Others believe it was thrown into the river, carried away by the currents, never to be seen again. But the most chilling theory, the one whispered by the old-timers in hushed tones, is that the eye was never destroyed at all. They say it found its way into another home, another unsuspecting family where it waits, watching, biding its time until it can claim its next victim. Willow Creek is quiet now, a shadow of its former self. The old house is gone, but the fear remains, and though the town has tried to forget, the legend of the Devil's Eye continues, a dark thread woven into the fabric of its history, a reminder that some curses never truly die.